Okay, so let's switch gears for a moment. Um, I want to talk tonight about cruising the islands of the Bahamas. Now, we talked about the Intracoastal Waterway, and as I put this together, I thought it would make more sense to split it into two talks. Tonight, we're going to talk about this from the assumption that you're already in Florida. Now, this boat is not our boat now. This is Pandora, a Bob Perry Saga 43 that we had in the Bahamas for a number of years. We've been in the Bahamas with our new boat, Pandora, our Aerodyne 47, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But this was our first trip. And in fact, this shot was as we made landfall in Chub Key after crossing the Bahamas Banks. This is so it's a really great boat. Let me get my next slide up here. But for a moment, I would talk about recommended equipment briefly, and we'll touch more on this later, either tonight if we have time or in a subsequent discussion. But without going into a whole lot of detail, I've talked in the past about having a good solid dinghy and a 15 horsepower motor. As I mentioned the other day, you can get a two-stroke 15 for about $2,400 in the Bahamas and you can order it ahead of time. And if you don't have a two-stroke, even though they're not as energy efficient as a four-stroke, they weigh about 50% less. And they're every bit as powerful. I strongly recommend it, and a Yamaha. And I actually called or checked with a marina in Nassau, Bahamas, and they told me they're available now. I mentioned the idea of having AIS both send and receive. That's an amazingly powerful tool for keeping you comfortable, especially at nighttime, because you can tell exactly whether you can read those lights well or not. You know if they're going to pass you port or starboard, or whether they're coming directly at you or going away, and how close they'll be. And to say to someone, I'm seeing you coming to me, I'm showing a CPA of about a mile on my port bow. What do you want to do about that? And inevitably, they will change direction and make it easy for you. Even though you're going to be maybe going down the ICW all the way to Florida, I still recommend you have a life raft on board. The Gulf Stream is a big place, and you may choose to make a longer run back, say go up to Charleston or even all the way up to New England. And a life raft is important to have. Buy yourself a good solid offshore life raft. EPIRBs are vital. I won't go into the details except to say that they're not expensive and they are your best case for getting picked up if you run into a problem. Of course, autopilot, you know all about that. Also, it's pretty inexpensive nowadays to have a personal locator beacon on an inflatable life vest. We can go into more detail about the benefits of, say, an AIS PLB or a EPIRB style, but something like that tucked into your life vest is important. I also recommend davits if you can fit them, and that's a great place to park solar power, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Water makers are not vital, but they're convenient. At the very least, you're going to want to have water jugs. Either whether you have a water maker or not, always want to have half a dozen plastic collapsible jugs so that you can get water. There are very few places in the Bahamas where you can pull your dinghy up to a dock. Chris Parker, and I'll talk a bit more about that, but he's vital for your trip to the Bahamas because the weather's very changeable. And I would recommend a Google Fi international phone. That's what I use here in the US, and it's very reasonably priced, and you get great Wi-Fi off of your phone. You use it as a hotspot, and for 20 cents a minute, you can call anywhere in the world with that phone, or just use it for WhatsApp or whatever you like. Additionally, for safety, that's really critical. Jack lines, both in the deck and the cockpit. I made my own by sewing them. I have a good Sailrite sewing machine, and every year or two I redo the stitching to make sure I don't have a problem. You want to keep those nice and snug along the deck. Security lanyards that you clip yourself to the boat. They make double lanyards with a 3-foot and a 6-foot. You want both of those because as you're going up the deck, you want to keep the 3-foot lanyard on, and if you have to get up near the mast, then you clip the longer one. A full enclosure is not vital, but it's nice to have. I think if you're thinking about switching to a different boat, you might want to invest in that right up front. But we believe strongly that keep making the house a home is really important, and the full enclosure, even in the tropics, is really great because inevitably there's strong breeze and you can adjust so you don't feel like you're out in the wind all the time. But certainly having a good enclosure helps. If you don't have a generator, a Honda is a good backup. I use that. I don't have a house generator. And with 600 watts of solar, you probably could get away without one, except for maybe air conditioning. I mentioned the water jugs. And then a handheld depth finder is really helpful in the Bahamas. Some of the areas you might choose to go into, you have to thread your way in because there are very few navigation aids. I'm showing you this picture because this was our first trip. This was aboard the old Pandora. This is in Bridgeport, Connecticut. This is where Brenda and I stopped the very night before we headed out. And the next day we went through New York and on our way south. It was the beginning of a really wonderful experience for us and took us away from home for 8 months. This is Pandora. I don't know if I've shown you a picture before, but Pandora is a 47-foot Aerodyne built in Helsinki. They made 3 of them, so you probably never see another. You'll see she has a hard Dodger, which is probably the main reason we bought the boat. And we had a full enclosure built. And as you can see, the radar arch is home to a pretty big solar array. One of the benefits of Pandora, she has a split rig called a Solent rig, and that includes a 100 jib and a code 0. I'll tell you that in the Northeast, we use the code 0 quite a bit. It's a huge sail, 140%, but we hardly ever use it in the Caribbean or the Bahamas. There's just too much wind down there. Not to go into a lot of detail, but this is just a glimpse down below. She's a nice boat, well put together. But I will point out that we make a big effort to feel like we're at home. This is actually, these are old melamine dishes. We have better ones now, but this is the most modern picture I have. And Brenda's made some really nice pillows. Those ones you see there are gone now, but we do have, we try to make it as comfortable as we possibly can. Having good bed linens is important. These have actually been worn to a point where we're not using them, but the subsequent ones are real high quality. Egyptian cotton type stuff. It is nice to have a comfortable bed. And I recommend, if nothing else, if you don't have a custom mattress, you're just using foam, get yourself a nice 2 or 3 inch memory foam to put over the top, and then put a real good quality mattress pad over that. Our cockpit is big. I mean, you can lay down on these cushions and it's very comfortable. But even if you don't have a hard Dodger like this, having an enclosure will keep you dry most of the time. You'll notice that we have a plotter up in the front of the cabin, a cockpit. That's the one we use most of the time. And then the little handheld device to the left of the instruments is a remote for the autopilot, which is pretty handy. Assume you're going to be away. You know, of course, you can leave your boat in Florida, but if you keep going, you're going to be away for 2 to 5 months before you even get down to. We spent 2.5 months getting to Florida, but overall, you could easily spend 5, or in our case, we spent 8 months. We left home in September and didn't get home till the next May with a quick trip home for Christmas. You may very well want to do part of the run offshore. Certainly Georgia and the Carolinas can be really challenging, but I will say going home is a lot easier than going south. And so you might very well find yourself saying, yeah, I'll do an offshore run up to Beaufort or something like that. When you have the Gulf Stream giving you a push north, you can do days of 200 miles. Provisioning is easier before you leave. Walmart, the ability to come back to your house in your own car and then wheel the stuff down the dock makes a big difference. And if you don't eat it at home, don't put it on the boat. If you don't eat canned corn at home, you probably won't eat it on the boat. And make sure you have lots of Ziploc bags because you're going to want to double bag everything to keep it from going stale. You'd be amazed at the amount of crap you can jam on a boat. This was actually the day that we took delivery of our new boat down in Florida. It's a mountain of stuff, and you can make all that stuff disappear. I recommend you keep track of where you put it, because you may very well find that you say, I know I've got that can of soup, but I can't find it. I talked about solar. This is 4 85-watt panels and a 300-watt panel, and or 290 watts. If you mix panels, you have to get separate MPPT controllers to do. Controllers don't like multiple panels. And one of the things about hard panels or even the flexible ones that are made like hard panels, is if part of it is shaded, the whole array shuts down. It can only stand about 5% shading before the whole thing shuts off. To give you a sense of the size of these panels, that's the back panel. That's a 300-watt panel. They are really big. There's a lot of real estate back there, and they're heavy. So you want to make sure that you have good, solid support for them. Our radar arch is 1.5 inch stainless steel. Sailing can be hard, and you can see there's Bill in the background, and sometimes it's lonely to be away from family and so forth. So make sure that you prepare for special events, Valentine's Day, birthdays. This was Brenda's birthday in Florida before we crossed over. And it makes a huge difference because there's always a little bit of melancholy when you're away from the family for some special holiday. So a little bit about the Bahamas. The Bahamas are close. It's only 50 miles from Florida. There's people that go out in a powerboat for the day to Bimini and then go back. They've been a self-ruled country since early 70s, but they're very formal and British. We've noticed in the Caribbean islands that were British, even though they're independent, they're still formal. This chain of islands is big. There's 700 islands, give or take. 500 miles from the Abacos down to the very southern island. That distance, just to give you some context of it, that's the same distance from Puerto Rico to Trinidad. The Antigua and the islands in between, it's the same distance as is the Bahamas. Of course, they're very different. But the Bahamas is broken up into 3 general areas. The Abacos, or the northern areas, the Exumas, the central, and then the far Bahamas, which includes some of the islands that you probably would be less likely to see. We're going to concentrate tonight more on the Exumas. Note that the Abacos were trashed by a hurricane a couple of years ago. Also, it's not recommended you go to the Abacos really until late March or even April or May because it's just too cold. 70 may not seem cold, but once you're in the Caribbean and the water of the Bahamas and the water's in the 80s, 70-degree air and a lot of wind, a cold front slamming through twice a week or so can feel pretty unpleasant. Most of the Bahamas is 10 to 15 feet deep, so 6 foot of draft or less is best. I will say our last boat was 5'10", and the current boat is 6'6", and we noticed a huge difference in just what that 6 inches of draft or 7 inches of draft made. Most of your, really everything you do in the Bahamas is by sight. You really don't move at night, except on the banks where you know where you are, but the water is incredibly clear, even at its worst, 30 feet of visibility and up to 100 feet in some of the out islands. It's all about the weather. As I mentioned, cold fronts are not your friend. Every time Essex or any place up here gets a cold storm, the Bahamas gets strong clocking winds. And when I say clocking, what I mean is normally the winds are out of the east, but when a cold front starts to come through, the winds go to the south, the southwest, the west, the northwest, and so forth. And the problem is very few of the islands in the Bahamas have any protection from the west. So when a front comes through, you have to be prepared to find a place to hide. You can do it, but you've got to plan for it. And that's the reason you've got to listen to the weather every single day. Chris Parker is what we use. Chris is probably not as critical down in the Caribbean because the weather is so much more predictable, but we still use him because it's nice to know when there's a big swell or something like that. But in the Bahamas, it's absolutely vital. And at $300 a year for basically virtually daily emails and either a consultation as necessary on the phone or over the single sideband, it's really a good deal. This is the geography of the Bahamas. The area to the north up here, that's the Abacos. The Exumas is this long 100-mile chain of islands that we're going to focus on. And then when we start talking about Ackland and the Mayaguana and so forth to the south, you're not likely to go there. This is Andros, which is the largest island in the Bahamas, but it's surrounded by treacherous reefs. And there's only one harbor on Andros that's usable, and that's right up here at the north, and that's primarily used by the mailboat. I don't actually know anyone that's ever been to Andros. So the Exumas, just to give you some context, Nassau up here in the upper left is probably where you would make landfall in the Bahamas, and then you'll cross the yellow banks here, and then work your way down the Exumas to Georgetown down here at the bottom. And if that's all you did in the entire season, that would be a wonderful trip. I'll talk a little bit about provisioning. Everything in the Bahamas, they have a minimal income tax. Primarily, they generate all their income from a value-added tax. 7.5% last I looked. It may be higher now. So assume that pretty much everything between shipping and the VAT is between 50 and 100% more expensive than the United States. As a rule of thumb, if it's lightweight, like cereal, paper towels, toilet paper, women hygiene products, whatever it is, if it's light and bulky, it's going to be twice, 3 times, maybe more expensive, because all shipping is done more or less by water. And it takes up just as much room to fill a container with lead weights as it does with paper towels. And so you're going to be paying the same shipping cost. All shipping by boat is primarily by volume, not by weight. Outside of the major areas, Marsh Harbor and the Abacos, Nassau on Providence Island and Nassau, Bahamas, and then Georgetown down in Great Exuma at the southern end of the Exuma chain. That's pretty much the only place you're going to find a major supermarket. And the only supermarket I've seen that really looks like a U.S. supermarket is the one in Nassau, and I'll show you where that is in a minute. Everything is pretty much imported. There's very little agriculture in the Bahamas. It's basically a desert. I mean, it rains occasionally. There was one year we were there, it rained once in 5 months. That was it. When you get outside of the major areas, it's pretty much just rural, very tiny settlements. Some of the islands aren't even Bahamas, aren't even populated. And it's pretty safe. I think that probably next year, because of the tremendous crush on their economy based upon the pandemic, it might be a little sketchier. Petty theft and so forth might be more of a problem. But Nassau and Freeport, and I do not recommend you go to Freeport. That's where all the big ships come in. But Nassau is not a place to walk around at night. But if you stay in the marinas, you're fine. The resources available to you, you're going to want to focus on the Bahamas Explorer charts. And as we go through this, I'm going to show you some charts that I got off of that group. I subscribe to them for this conversation. And then you also want to subscribe to Chris Parker. Don't think you can use your Navionics charts. They're not good. They're way off, in some cases by a mile. And it's very critical because you're going to be pointing yourself from waypoint to waypoint because there are no marks. What I do on our boat is I use my Explorer, my Navionics on my plotter, and then I just manually put in the individual waypoints and use the iPad to visually back that up in the cockpit. If you need to have equipment sent in, there's a group out of Florida called Watermakers Air, and they air freight everything from Florida, and it's quick. You can get stuff overnight, and it's a few dollars a pound, so it's a good way to do it. Some things will be subject to duty, but some of them won't. And pretty much everywhere you go, with the exception of some areas in the Land and Sea Park, which I'll talk about in a moment, is strong cell and data service. Wi-Fi is fairly ubiquitous in those towns. So you won't be out of touch. Now we're going to talk a little bit about crossing the Gulf Stream briefly. Generally, you want to leave from Fort Lauderdale or Miami and cross over to Bimini, or not stop in Bimini, and I'll talk about the logic of that in a minute. But basically the distance is short. The Gulf Stream, you'll be in the clutches of the Gulf Stream for less than 50 miles. From there, it's another 70 miles to Chub Key, and then you're back in the tongue of the ocean and you're in water that's thousands of feet deep. It's only 35 miles from Chub to Nassau, and then 35 miles from there to the Exuma chain. So we're talking really short runs here. But basically what we would recommend is you do an overnight from Florida to Nassau, or maybe stop in Bimini, in Nassau. The problem with stopping in Bimini, even though it's close, is that it's hard to get a weather window to cross over to the Bahamas because of the winds. It's usually strong out of the east, and you just can't push up against that. And if it's out of the north, it's just messy. The waves are just unpleasant, very short, couple of seconds chop. And it can be with a 10-knot wind, it can be 6-8 feet of very sharp waves. It's terribly unpleasant.
Hey Bob, are you saying that it's better to start south and work north based on the climate for starters? But
yeah, you don't want to begin. If I understand what you're saying, Steve, you don't want to begin your season in the Abacos. It's just too cold, and it's windy as hell up there. and you want to enjoy the warm weather. So generally what happens is people go to Nassau and then they work their way down to Georgetown. And then as the season progresses, they head north again. You can leave from Lake Worth to the Abacos. It's only 50 miles to West End. I'm not going to get into the charts on that, but you can do it. But again, then you got to go all the way down to, or you're going to be cold. And the Abacos are a pretty constrained cruising area. There's not a lot of areas to explore, and nothing compared to the southern Bahamas. And crossing the Gulf Stream is really easy sometimes if you do it right. And as a rule of thumb, you want to leave when the wind, you want to leave before a cold front when the winds are light out of the southeast. So you've got less than 10 knots and you're motoring into it. And then as the wind clocks around, you're now on the banks or on your way down to Nassau and you have a nice breeze. Now you got to be careful about that. And then you want to talk very carefully with Chris Parker, because one year I have a friend who's a bit of a Yahoo, and he had a Saga 43 like we did. And he said, because it's a very fast boat, in some conditions it's faster than our Aerodyne. But he said, what you want to do, Bob, is pick a nice strong front, leave on as the wind is clocking around from the southwest, and you sail across the Gulf Stream. And then as it comes around to the north, you're sailing across the banks. And then from the northeast, you're going down to Nassau. And you can do that if you can keep your speed up to 7 knots. What he didn't tell me was that, well, actually, he didn't know either, but what Chris Parker didn't tell me or didn't realize is there was going to be squally as hell. So we ended up with thunderstorms all the way across the bank. And it was really quite scary because we're screaming along in the dark in water that's about 10 feet deep with squalls and lightning everywhere. It was not pleasant, but convective storms are easy to plan for generally. And so if you do it right, it may cost you a couple of weeks of waiting, but you're going to end up with a good crossing. We've crossed when it's been flat calm. Now, the pink line is the rum line to the mark just above Bimini. That's going to be your entry point onto the banks. And we'll get a little bit more about that in a minute. The black line that's straight is your point. What you're going to do is you calculate the amount of time it's going to take you to get across the Gulf Stream. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that the strongest current is going to be about 5 knots. And that's going to start, the Gulf Stream starts here about 2 miles off of Fort Lauderdale. But you're going to get maybe 1/4 of a knot, then 1/2 a knot, then a knot, then 2 knots and 3 knots. And by the time you're, say, 1/3 of the way, you're going to be in the clutches of 5 knots pushing you north. But you're going to keep that point. In this particular case, I made that 20 miles south of where I want to get in. The theory being that I average about 7 knots crossing the Gulf Stream because I'm going to push pretty hard. And or even if it was 6, let's say it's 6 knots. If it's 50 miles, it's going to take me maybe 12 hours to cross the Gulf Stream. That means that I am going to spend maybe 6 hours in 5 knots of northbound current and the rest of it in shorter amounts. And as you get within a few miles of Bimini, it really starts to cut way down. So I averaged and estimated that I would lose maybe 3 knots of southing for every hour I'm in the Gulf Stream on average. So that means that over 7 or 8 hours of crossing, I'm going to lose 20 miles. If you're slower, it's more. So you might want to go a little farther south. The height. So what happens when you start, you'll see this arc brings you along. Now we're sort of pointing directly for that waypoint, but as we get more current, it starts to push us more to the north. And for a while, we're actually north of where we are, but we're still pointing in that same direction. So as the current starts to get less, now we start going back down again. And towards the end, we're paralleling this same mark down at the bottom. So if you time it right, even though you never change course, you're going to end up right where you want. Now, let's just say, for argument's sake, that you decided you were going to follow and head for waypoint number 1. What's going to happen is this arc is going to go way up here. And by the end, you're going to be pointing down towards that. And you're going to be basically going against the Gulf Stream, which is pushing you to the northeast. And it's going to take you 3 times longer, because instead of making an average of say 6 knots over the bottom. Now you're maybe going 2 knots, maybe 1 knot over the bottom because you've got the current pushing you to the north. Does that make sense? It's a little bit of a hard thing to get your head around. So now you're crossed over. This at the left-hand side of the screen is Bimini, and you have a straight shot down to Mackay Shoal. Now the point here is there's the water level. This is in meters. So if you see 6 meters, that's 18 feet. There's nothing at all you have to worry about once you get around that mark until you get to Mackay Shoal. And in most cases, you've got more than 7 feet of water. But if you go a little further south, you'll see in this case, there's a 2.5 meter section. That's only about 7 feet. There's not a lot of water there. I personally don't trust these charts exactly, but you'll notice that the soundings are kind of lined up in a row because those are actual soundings that someone made when they put these charts together, and they're updated on a regular basis. So if you follow this waypoint, and you'll see that when it says 2141 and 7839, you're going to put that into your plotter and you're going to head directly for that. If you do that, you won't have a problem. Now it's dark now, so you're not going to see anything anyway, but you're fine. And if there's any strong wind, it's going to be pretty calm because the water is very shallow here. It's less than 15 feet deep. Now, if it's calm enough, while you're out in the ocean, you might get one of these. This is a dorade, or a dolphin as they call them. They're huge fish. One of the problems when you catch one of these is you got to deal with it. And as you can see, the deck is covered with blood. But I mention this because your next point, as you get to your next waypoint, you're going to be back into really deep water. Once you get into the Northwest Channel, the water is thousands of feet deep. Now, you see that little arrow, the blue arrow, that's what's called the Northwest Channel light. That is your most important waypoint, but there's no light. It's a post sticking out of a pile of rock. And so there is a waypoint. You'll see 2 waypoints. One here, it says this one to the left, and then there's another one. It's a little hard to see because the chart is small, but you put those into your chart and you slavishly go to those waypoints and you will have no problem whatsoever. But you do not want to stray from that in either direction, because just to the north of it is a reef and just to the south of it is a pile of rocks, and you don't want to hit either one. I will tell you, the first time we went by there, I really wasn't completely confident of my waypoints, and I had my heart in my throat, but it worked out. Now, if you choose, you can stop in Chub Key if you don't want to go all the way. This over here to the right, and it's a really nice spot to go. And this is the chart. Now, Chub, you can clear in Chub, and you'll see there's a marina there. And I checked today actually, and a 50-foot boat is $175 a night this year. But when we were there, it was $4 a foot. So it's really expensive, and generally it's used by sport fish. You can anchor where my arrow is, and it's a beautiful spot. And generally, if the wind isn't too strong, it's okay, even if the wind's out of the north. As you can see, just north of there, the water is less than 4 feet deep. It's very, very shallow. It's crystal clear. The day that we came over there, the boat had been sitting in a marina for a while. The bottom was quite foul, and I went swimming to clean it. Meanwhile, Brenda kept an eye on a big shark that was swimming around about 100 yards out. He never bothered us, but I told her if he came close to bang on the side of the boat with a hammer. But she didn't need to. Now you've got it to the Bahamas. You've made it to the end of your little rainbow. That actually is a rainbow on the island off of Chub Key. It's a really pretty spot. So from there, it's not very far to Nassau. And if you decided to continue, you're going to arrive in Nassau in the middle of the afternoon. If your mast is over 70 feet high, you're not going to be able to go through Nassau. You're going to have to go around the other way. But anybody else can go straight in. Here to the left are the cruise ship terminals. It's a very easy. There's actually a light. That's the only light I actually saw in all of the Bahamas, and that's the entrance to Nassau Harbor. Once you get underneath this area to the right is where we generally stay. But for sure, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get yourself a Kalik beer and congratulate yourself on your arrival. As I mentioned, the Bahamas are very British. I mean, this is about as British as you're going to see anywhere. It's even more British than anything I've seen in the Caribbean. It's quite a charming place. It is also a hangout of the rich and famous. This is Paradise Island. This is a marina. If you want to spend $4 a night, you can come here for the day or for a night, but you will be, I guarantee, at the smallest boat in the marina. After you go under those bridges, Nassau Harbor Club is where we generally stop. It's about $1.75 a foot overnight, and that includes, I think, of water. I'm not sure, it depends. But they have a pool, and directly across the street here at the bottom is a really nice fresh market of is every bit as nice as anything you'll see in the United States. It's a super duper place to do some provisioning. Expensive perhaps, but nowhere near as expensive as the out islands. But you tie up there, it's easy to get in. If you draw more than 6 feet, which we do, you can either sneak in at that little section near Potter's Cay or go out a little further and come around, which is what we generally do. But this area, there's some really nice restaurants, and this would be a good place to leave a boat if you wanted to go back to the US. Off to the left, you'll see Potter's Cay, or Potter's Cay is a fishing area, but it's also a green market and a really fascinating place to go. I wouldn't do it after dark, but during the day, it's pretty amazing. I mean, there's those traps you see there are full of land crabs, and they stink, but they're these big crabs the size of a dinner plate that run around on shore at night, and they cook them. So now, after you've hung out in Nassau, maybe licked your wounds a little bit, or decided to hang in there and just enjoy the area. It is a nice area, but very different than the rest of the Caribbean, Bahamas. You're going to cross over to the Exumas. Now you'll see all these purple lines, and these are recommended in the Explorer Guide, depending upon which island you're looking to go to. In the middle, you'll see what looks like pepper spots, and those are coral heads. You don't want to cross this area on a cloudy day. Fortunately, most of the time it's not cloudy in the Bahamas, but you want to make sure you leave first thing in the morning. You want the sun to be behind you as you cross this so you can see them. They show up as black ink spots, very distinct. You can't miss them. It's like someone poured ink in the water. It may be 50 feet across, and you just weave your way through those. The water can be pretty shallow there, but if you but I won't go into the detail except to say you really want to be quite diligent, even more so when you're going up to the north, and you might do that if you're going up to the Abacos, and there it is like a slalom course going between the coral heads. So now so just to give you some context, in the Providence is Nassau, and then here you're now in the in the Exumas, which runs for 100 miles. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail except to say that there are many places to get from there out into the tongue of the ocean. But notice, for example, this is one near Cambridge Key and Compass Key, which is a wonderful area for gunk holing. But if you look, you'll see that the entrance here out where it says Conch Cut shows 12 meters. But at the other end, it says 4 meters. And in some case, this is one of the best inlets. In some cases, you would find that you would only have, you'd come in, you'd have lots of water, but suddenly you have 6 feet of water or less. And so you have to be very conscious of what is at the other end of where you're trying to go. And in particular, up here, near Bell Island, you'll see 7 foot, 3 foot, all 7 meters and so forth. But then there'll be a spot where there's no water at all. But you're going to learn to read the water and tell the depth based upon the color. The lighter the water, the shallower it is. Although that can be confusing if you're looking at coral or weed, it can look deeper than it really is. But overall, you learn to tell what you're looking at based upon the color of the water. And the water is spectacular. There is no place in the Caribbean that you're going to find that is as consistently beautiful as it is here in the Bahamas. Once you get into these islands, these little settlements, there'll be someone that'll bake bread and you pick up. That's really about the only way to get fresh bread. Earlier in this conversation, a few weeks ago, we talked about bringing along fun stuff. This was a celebration of a new niece that we had at that time. Now Brenda's created a lot of teeny little sweaters since then, but she really keeps herself busy with a lot of things. She makes baskets and so forth with local materials, but she just wants to enjoy the area. There are areas that are more civilized, or more, if you want to go to a resort, they're there too. But overall, probably the best part of the day is just to sit in the cockpit and because you're on the western side of these islands, the sunset is always behind you. The Bahamas is really made up of old prehistoric sand dunes, and over the millennia, water percolated down and calcified them and created these big areas that are really more like caves and so forth. But you'll spend most of your time in areas that look kind of like this, and you're going to be looking down in this particular spot. What we could see every day, rays would come by, and the currents are really strong, so the water is fresh, excuse me, it's very clear, and there's a lot of sea life, actually more than you generally would see in a harbor in the Caribbean, where there's a lot less flushing of the water. And as you move from place to place, you can see the bottom, and this is a good example of that. This is a mixture of limestone and sand, and it looks like that. And then along the way, you can buy lobsters or whatever, a conch, which are very popular, or fish and so forth. But once you're outside of the main areas like Nassau, everything comes in by mailboat. It is just like 100 years ago. Every single item on the ship is offloaded with a crane. And then they put it into a little truck, and then off it goes to the store. And the next morning they open it up. There's only one place that we've been comfortable doing laundry in all of the Bahamas, and that's down in Black Point. And you can also, while you're doing your laundry, she'll cut your hair. It's probably the only place you'll ever be where you'll see sharks while you're getting your hair cut. And speaking of sharks, there are a lot of sharks in the Bahamas. Fortunately, most of them are these, and these are nurse sharks. You can swim with them. There's nothing to worry about. But occasionally they will, you'll get bull sharks and other reef sharks that you really don't want to get near them. We ran into that more in some of the out islands, where some of the locals the kids would get a kick out of throwing a fish head into the water with a rope on it and playing tug of war with a 10-foot shark. And so they ended up attracting bull sharks, which are man-eaters. That's not good at all. But you can see this guy here on the right, he's cleaning fish. And so every day this is in Compass Key Marina, and in fact, for a small fee, they'll let you go swimming with them, and it's really quite a lot of fun. All through the Exumas, there are small airports. This is our son, Christopher, who came to visit us one year, and these are tiny airports. Trust me, that's the terminal. These are not big planes. You sign in for your flight right there, and maybe 10 minutes before the plane comes in, someone comes out, stands at that table, and tells you what to do.
Pre-code.
Everywhere you go in the Bahamas are other cruisers, and sometimes there's a lot of them, sometimes there's a little of them. But if you want to be with people, there's people there for you. If you don't, you can be on your own. But it is a very social place. To me, it looks kind of like a retirement village, because most of the people are older. And in fact, you'll see Bill and Maureen playing Mexican Train with some friends that we buddy boated with, Melinda and Harry. Unfortunately, Harry is passed away a few years ago, but they were the four of them. Harry here on the left, on the right, Melinda, Bill, and Maureen were our mentors when we were heading down that very first year. We love to shell, and honestly, speaking of seashell, or Harry and Melinda shell, there are some amazing areas for shelling down in the Bahamas, and these very shallow areas, especially in the Exuma chain and Compass Key in particular, you can pick up some just wonderful shells. And these were all abandoned shells. It wasn't like we were killing something. But we collected more shells, and I don't know what we'll ever do with them, but it was fun. The only place we've ever been where there were more shells than this was Cuba, and that's mostly because there's just nobody there doing it. You just cannot beat the beauty of the water. And as I was talking about the depth, the dark blue area is about 10 to 15 feet deep. The white area is under 3 feet. Maybe 2 feet, even ankle deep. And because the currents are so strong, you can anchor very close to shore, and the current will keep you from bumping into it. This is part of the Land and Sea Park. This is, you have to take a mooring here, but it's very nice. And the moorings are, I don't know, 20, 25 bucks a night. It's totally worth it. I've talked about rain. You don't get much, but you do often get these clouds that come in when a cold front comes down, and it can get very, very windy, 30, 40 knots. Now suddenly you're on a lee shore, so you're going to want to find a home on the other side of the island. This is actually Georgetown, which is where a lot of people hang out in the southern Bahamas. It's the largest harbor. This fairly well protected in the Bahamas, but it's over a mile wide. So when the fronts come through, you really have to move to the other side of the harbor. On the ocean side is a whole other kettle of fish, and the waves are crashing up on it. So, so everyone is on, obviously it's in the lee. And as you can see, the darker areas, that's all coral and limestone. So these are quite treacherous waters. Another interesting thing about the limestone is because it's porous, water will run in and out of it over tens of thousands of years and create what they call blue holes. This is one of the deepest blue holes in the world. It's over 500 feet deep, and it's a straight drop. The dark blue, straight down, no ledges, just straight down 500 feet. And this is where they do the free diving competition. This is one of the most popular spots in the world. And that ramp, people will sit there. They put on they put on real big fins, and then they swim down as far as they can. It's a very dangerous sport. Someone was going to say something? Oh, thought it was a question. The religion is a big part of the Bahamas. Nothing happens on Sundays. On Sundays, everything is closed. And there are beautiful churches all throughout the islands. And Bill and Maureen are devout Catholics, and they would go to church every week when we were in the Bahamas together. These churches are quite spectacular. There's some of
You're exaggerating.
Okay, well, you went a lot of times, certainly more than we did. But there is a big, very popular thing is spiny lobster in the Bahamas. Unlike the or Caribbean lobsters, as they call them, unlike the Maine lobsters, they don't have a big claw, but they have a real big tail. This one is even bigger than it looks. This was a guy we met in one of the southern islands in Rum Cay, and he just free dived to catch that. That's probably a 5-pound lobster that he just pulled out from under a coral head. Some of the areas down there are quite dramatic. This is a limestone cliff. That's our dinghy, and that shows you the rise in the bow that we talked about. That's so important in keeping for a dry ride. And there's not uncommon, especially in some of the areas, especially like Compass Key, where you might very well find yourself powering along for 5 miles, exploring various areas, and having a good engine and a good dinghy is really critical. Occasionally there's wildlife. This is one of just a couple of islands in the Bahamas that have these indigenous lizards. They look pretty nasty, but they're always looking for a handout. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the areas, just getting in and out of some of these. You've probably heard of the pigs in the Bahamas, and they hang out on Big Major Spot in this area, and then Staniel Key Yacht Club over here to the right. But again, as you enter from the area, the tongue of the ocean, here you're coming through. You'll see this cut. It's only 3 meters. That's 9 feet. Then as you hang a left and come down through, there's a spot. Sometimes it gets very shallow, and towards the end, it's only 2 meters deep. We can't even get through there except at high tide, and it's an 18-inch tide at most. But as you come around the back of Big Major Spot, the holding is just terrific there. Deep, deep sand, and it's usually got a lot of boats. And then you go ashore with whatever little tidbits you have, and out come the porkers. And there's usually some baby ones too. They're pretty cute. Just to give you an aerial view of this area, off to the left is that Big Major Spot Island, and here's the entrance from the ocean. And you can see again, it's very easy to tell the depth of the water based upon the color. This is the Staniel Key Yacht Club. It's not a yacht club really; it's a restaurant with a bunch of rental residences. But basically, this is your only choice for a good restaurant outside of an occasional one that might cost you $100 a head, because the food is terribly expensive. But at this particular restaurant, it's very popular with cruisers, and so they'll come over and then spend the evening there and then take their dinghy back. You may have heard of Thunderball Cave out of the James Bond movie, and that's over here, this little island up at the top of the screen where they filmed that movie with James Bond many years ago. Another really popular thing is the family regattas, where they bring in these boats from all over. They bring them in on the mail boats. These are the Bahamas skiffs. I was fortunate enough to be able to crew on one of these our first year in the Bahamas, and it is a real hoot. And as we kind of finish up here, I'll show you, this was a boat that I was crewing on. And what you do is you climb out on these prides. They're called prides. They're basically 10-foot oak beams that you sit on, and they varnish them, and then they throw sand on it to make them a little less slippery before the varnish dries. The first time I got up on the pride, I ended up on the top, and they decided I just didn't weigh enough at 135 pounds. The guys below me, like you can see that guy, he weighed a lot more than I did. So he grabbed me and pulled me over his shoulders, and he slid himself up to the top of the pride. And what would happen is as you change direction, the pride is pulled in and put out the other side, and then the captain yells, "Get out on the fucking pride, get out on the fucking pride." And that would happen every time you tack. These boats are heavily canvassed with virtually no ballast, and they take off and race together. It's a really exciting sport. I could do a whole presentation just on that experience. We actually ran into a boat and sank it. It was pretty unbelievable. So I'll leave you with this, and that is that this is a view of Kaluna Bill and Maureen, who are about to head back to Kaluna and the sunset in the background, and this could be you.